There are moments in life that appear ordinary until fate folds them open and reveals how close we live to miracles. It was on a sun-washed afternoon in a crowded downtown street when 12-year-old Keisha Brown, a poor African-American girl from the city's south side, became the center of such a moment. She didn't look like the kind of person the world noticed. Her clothes were worn, her shoes faded, and her backpack, patched with scraps of fabric, swung loosely from one shoulder. But her heart carried a quiet courage that would, within minutes, touch lives far beyond anything she could imagine. Keisha lived with her mother in a small apartment where the walls remembered better times. Her mother, Tanya, worked double shifts at a diner, leaving before dawn and coming home long after the evening news had ended. They survived on faith, leftovers, and the fragile hope that tomorrow might open up a little more kindness. Keisha knew struggle not as a word, but as a rhythm. The sound of bills on the counter, the silence when her mother's energy ran out. The way the world measured people by what they owned instead of what they carried inside. That day, Keisha was on her way home from school, walking the long route that wound through downtown before dipping toward her neighborhood. The city was alive with its usual pulse. Car horns, chatter, and footsteps moving in a rush that seemed to belong to someone else's story. She walked with her head high, the way her mother taught her, and with an alertness that came from growing up in a place where the world could shift suddenly. At the intersection near the shopping plaza, the traffic light blinked from red to green. People crossed in hurried streams. Keisha waited at the curb, balancing the small grocery bag her mother had asked her to pick up on the way home. That's when she saw it. A small child, no more than 6 years old, standing at the edge of the road with a balloon string wound around her wrist. The girl's hand slipped free from her mother's grip for only a second, but a second was all it took. The balloon jerked in the air, and the little girl, chasing it, stepped directly into the oncoming lane. Time slowed the way it does before tragedy. The sound of screeching tires, a driver's panicked horn, the sharp gasp of strangers, everything blended into a heartbeat that froze the city. Without thinking, Keisha dropped her grocery bag and sprinted. She didn't consider her safety or the traffic lights. She didn't weigh consequence or fear. Her body simply moved. Pure instinct, pure compassion. She reached the child just as the car skidded, scooped her up, and twisted them both toward the sidewalk. The driver's bumper missed them by a breath. The impact of the near collision swept wind and gravel against her legs, leaving streaks of dust across her knees, but both girls were safe. For a moment, the world fell silent. Then chaos broke. People shouting, brakes screeching, a crowd rushing forward. The small blonde girl clung to Keisha's neck, shaking with silent sobs, her balloon floating away into the indifferent sky. Keisha held her gently, whispering comfort only through her presence. She brushed the child's hair back and checked her arms, making sure there were no scrapes or bruises. A few feet away, a woman, the girl's mother, stumbled forward, pale with shock. She had frozen during the moment, paralyzed by fear. Now she rushed in, trembling, tears streaking her cheeks. The woman pulled her daughter close, collapsing into relief. Keisha stepped back, trying to disappear into the crowd. She didn't want attention, only to make sure the child was safe. Her grocery bag lay crushed by the curb, its contents scattered. A loaf of bread, a carton of milk, and a few apples. She bent quietly to pick them up, her hands shaking from adrenaline. Then another figure appeared, tall, commanding, dressed in an expensive charcoal suit that seemed out of place in the messy humanity of the sidewalk. Richard Walker, a billionaire real estate developer, had just stepped out of his car across the street. He had seen the whole thing. His daughter, Lily, was the child Keisha had pulled from death's path. Richard's life had been built on numbers, deals, and schedules that left no room for interruptions. He was a man who owned half the city's skyline but had rarely set foot on the ground long enough to see what it felt like beneath his shoes. In those few seconds, everything that defined him, power, wealth, reputation, had been stripped away and replaced by a single truth. A poor black girl had saved his daughter's life while risking her own. He pushed through the onlookers, eyes wide with disbelief and gratitude. Keisha stood there, still catching her breath, clutching her grocery bag. Her small frame looked even smaller against the backdrop of luxury cars and polished glass buildings. Dirt smeared her knees. Her hair had come loose in the rush, but there was something radiant about her. Not in her appearance, but in the quiet strength that comes from doing something selfless without expectation. In that moment, the billionaire's heart broke open. Richard was not a man who cried easily, but tears came before pride could stop them. He reached Keisha and, without words, wrapped his arms around her. The crowd watched in stunned silence. The image, a wealthy white man kneeling on a city sidewalk, hugging a poor black girl who had just saved his child, struck something deep and rare in everyone present. It was a collision of two worlds that almost never touched except through headlines and stereotypes. But here, it was pure humanity. The city's photographers caught the scene, and within hours, it flooded social media. The picture of Keisha in her tattered school uniform, arms at her side while the billionaire father clung to her in tears, became a symbol of compassion that the internet rarely sees without irony. While the internet buzzed, Keisha simply walked home, unaware that her life was about to change forever. She arrived at the small apartment late, groceries slightly bruised, and told her mother what had happened with the calm of someone who still hadn't grasped the enormity of her act. Tanya listened, eyes wide, hand over her mouth. The world rarely rewards goodness, she thought, but she prayed that maybe this time it would. The next morning, everything was different. Reporters had swarmed their apartment building. Neighbors peeked from doors, pointing as a convoy of black cars pulled up outside. Richard Walker stepped out, surrounded by his staff and cameras. He wasn't there for publicity. He was there for gratitude. In his hand, he carried a folded letter and a scholarship document. He had spent the entire night trying to understand how to repay something that could never be repaid. When he met Keisha and her mother, he saw the peeling paint of their walls, the faint smell of cooking oil, the exhaustion in Tanya's face. He realized how the world divides people by circumstances rather than worth. Richard didn't speak in grand gestures. He let action do the speaking. That day, he arranged for Keisha's education to be fully funded through college. He also created a new charitable trust, the Keisha Brown Foundation for Every Day. Heroes, aimed at recognizing and supporting acts of courage and compassion among ordinary people. The story captured the nation's heart. Television shows, newspapers, and social media platforms replayed the image of Keisha's bravery. But behind the headlines, there was something even more powerful unfolding: Richard Walker's transformation. A man once obsessed with profit margins began using his influence to fund school programs, improve pedestrian safety in underserved neighborhoods, and provide aid to families living in poverty. He became the public face of corporate empathy, but privately, he credited it all to the girl who reminded him what humanity truly meant. Keisha's life changed, too, but not in the ways fame often corrupts. She remained humble, her mother guiding her with quiet wisdom. They moved into a better apartment where light actually reached the kitchen window. Keisha started at a new school where she thrived academically. Her bravery inspired others. Classmates began organizing kindness projects. Teachers used her story to talk about courage and selflessness. The girl who once felt invisible had become a symbol of everything right with the world. Years passed, and the bond between the two families deepened. Richard treated Keisha like family, not as a savior but as someone he owed gratitude beyond measure. Lily, the little girl she had saved, grew up seeing Keisha as her hero, mentor, and friend. The two girls came from different worlds, yet they shared a connection that transcended color, class, and background. The connection of a moment when one life risked itself for another. Keisha's foundation grew too. Under Richard's guidance, it expanded across the country, offering scholarships, community aid, and mentorship programs for underprivileged youth. But Keisha remained grounded. She often visited shelters, reading to children, reminding them that even when life feels small, their actions can echo in ways they'll never see. For Richard, that single afternoon had redefined success. He stopped measuring wealth by balance sheets and began measuring it by impact. In interviews, he often spoke about the day a little girl saved everything I truly cared about. His business empire became known for its humanitarian outreach, but more importantly, he used his power to change systems that kept people like Keisha invisible. When Keisha graduated from college, the ceremony became a public celebration. Richard was there in the front row, clapping through tears, while Tanya wept quietly beside him. The once poor black girl who had saved a stranger's child now stood as a symbol of resilience and grace. She earned a degree in social work, determined to help children who face the same hardships she once did. And when reporters asked her how it felt to have changed so many lives, she simply said that she never meant to change anything. She just couldn't stand still when someone needed help. That single sentence became the motto of her foundation. Over time, Keisha's story became more than a viral headline. It became a reminder that compassion is not bound by wealth or circumstance. It lives in the hearts of those who act when it matters most. The image of her standing on that busy street, holding a frightened child in her arms while chaos roared around her, became part of the city's mural art, painted on a downtown wall with the words, "Kindness can save lives." Her bravery also inspired legislative change. The mayor introduced a new pedestrian safety initiative, citing Keisha's courage as the inspiration. Crosswalks near schools were upgraded, drivers were required to slow down in family zones, and the foundation funded awareness campaigns teaching children safety and empathy. But beyond all the public recognition, what mattered most was how Keisha's heart never changed. She continued to live by the same principles she'd learned from her mother: to be kind even when the world isn't, to give even when you have little, and to believe that one act of courage can ripple through generations. When Keisha turned 25, the foundation she'd once inspired had grown to serve thousands. On its 10th anniversary, Richard, now older and grayer, stood beside her on stage as she gave a speech to a crowd of volunteers, students, and donors. She looked out at them, faces of all races and backgrounds, and thought of the little girl she'd once been, standing at a crosswalk with a grocery bag, unaware that the next few seconds would change not only her life, but countless others. In the front row sat Lily Walker, now grown, tears streaming down her face as she clapped for the woman who had saved her life long ago. Their eyes met, and for a fleeting second, time folded back on itself. Two souls bound forever by a moment of selflessness. As the applause echoed through the hall, Keisha smiled. She had never sought recognition, wealth, or fame. What she had wanted, even as a child, was a kinder world, and somehow, through a single instinctive act, she had helped to build one. Years later, when Richard passed away, the foundation he built with Keisha became his lasting legacy. His obituary didn't list his billions or his business achievements first. It began with a sentence that summed up his life's greatest change. He was the man who never forgot the little girl who saved his daughter, and through her, rediscovered his humanity. And somewhere in a quiet neighborhood, Keisha would sometimes walk home under the same city lights that had once witnessed her courage. She would glance at crosswalks filled with children and parents, at strangers helping each other, and feel a deep peace. She knew that kindness doesn't end when applause fades. It becomes part of the world's unseen rhythm, passed from one heart to another. Because sometimes the poorest among us hold the richest hearts. Sometimes the smallest act of bravery becomes the greatest lesson of all. And sometimes a little girl saving another child from traffic can teach the world what true wealth really means.